Good morning. We had a huge USDA report dump yesterday. Ton of numbers came out, so we needed a day to recover before we did the video. Not great numbers, just to warn you all. I'm going to skip these and get right to the numbers. First thing we're going to talk about is corn and soybean production.
They turned out to be a lot more bearish than what we anticipated. Looking at the numbers, I mean, on face value, you'd almost think that we annexed another country into the U.S. because the production numbers up quite a bit. But instead of actually, everybody was expecting USDA to come in and lower production in this report, lower the yield and follow through with lower production. It was just the opposite. USDA came in and increased yield by half a bushel, 2.5 above expectations. And they also came in, which nobody had on their radar, basically, was increasing harvested acres. And they bumped the acres by almost 1.28 million. So it was a huge increase in production that most of the trade was not prepared for. And when you looked at where the increase came, most of the increase came in the plain states where we saw the bigger yields. And then we saw bigger acreage pretty much across, the same region where it appears that yields were good enough, a lot of less chopping and a lot more combining took place.
We did go back and look. This shows the average trade estimate, but the entire range of trade estimates on corn, USDA was outside of those.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, they came in with the yield was at the above expectations, the high end of the expectations. Harvested acres were above or at the high end of the expectation. So, like you mentioned, nobody had it on their radar that USDA was going to be coming in and increasing the production as much as they did. I mean, that's a huge increase when you add 269 million bushels from the previous month, and it actually turned out to be closer to, from expectations, 269 above the previous, 429 above the average trade estimate.
So digging into the corn numbers, kind of like you said, we saw, Iowa, Illinois, their yields actually dropped from last year, but then states like Minnesota set a record yield up 15%, production up 26%.
And that it kind of showed that Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio all saw lower yields, whereas Nebraska, Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota all showed much higher yields than anticipated. So again, it was the Western Corn Belt carried the Central and Eastern Corn Belt as far as corn production was concerned.
Yield, that would be a record yield, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And we shattered. I mean, last year was a record. We figured our trend line would come in somewhere around 182. We kind of shattered that this year by seeing the increase even by that half a bushel. So now, I mean, a lot of debate is going to go, was the yield really there? And it's going to be interesting as we move forward. But how that's going to impact acres for 26 is going to be interesting because now we have a lot more corn on hand than what we anticipated. Demand has been very good, but yet there's a lot of stocks. And will that mean that we'll see a little bit of a slowdown in acres increase? That's going to be the big question now.
And with that record yield and higher acres this year, so I had to go to. We did have record production also. Coming from that, back to the states though. And again, the blue states means your yield went up from last year. We had Minnesota had a record. And then, like you said, too, it was the I states have some of the red in there, the lighter blue, and where the Midwest has more of the darker blue.
You're looking at it, North Dakota setting a record, Minnesota setting a record, South Dakota, Nebraska, Michigan. So there was a lot of records that were set and a lot bigger production than what was anticipated.
And then, like I said, we did hit record production with that yield. Moving on to soybeans, numbers weren't quite as extreme here.
No, they weren't. I mean, they actually came in pretty close to expectations. I mean, they were within the ranges anyway. And even though we did see yield left unchanged, which most were anticipating a lower yield in soybeans, we did see a small increase in acres. That was a little bit of a surprise. But overall, the numbers were a little bit more manageable as far as soybeans were concerned.
There's where we came with the yield,
And
which
again,
isn't record.
another record yield and above trend line. So I mean, it showed that we had pretty good production as far as the soybeans were concerned. And again, I think you'll show most of that was probably in the central and eastern corn belt, where the western was a little less.
And again, here's the map comparing it to last year. Kind of the same pattern of corn. We didn't get the record yield up here. Minnesota did, though.
Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Kansas, all setting records. South Dakota a little bit higher than last year. So Iowa setting a record. So yeah, the bean production was pretty good, especially when you look at the center part of the Corn Belt.
And then when we look at production, we had a record yield. We did not have record production because our acres were a bit lower than they were last year. So looking at some of the minor crops with canola, that's my number here. Canola there, it was a record yield and the second highest production on record. Is that going to affect people's decisions about planting canola this year?
I don't know if it will, mainly because if we can get if it'll all more come down to if Canada and China can agree and get some sort of an agreement going, that will help prop up and support the canola prices. So right now, I mean, the fact that we had good yields, it might increase some acres next year because it's a good alternative for some of the other crops.
Anything else you want to mention on this page?
Dry beans, it's interesting that we saw the production's down as much as we were. I mean, acres were down 11%, both harvested and planted and harvested. Yield slipped a little bit, and production was down about 14% from the previous year. So that might encourage a few more acres of edible beans and maybe a little more aggressive bidding for acres.
This page, the lentils are really the only thing in our area there. And then here we have sugar beets and sunflowers. Sunflowers, again, had a record yield. Production was up 104% over last year. That is, though, because 2024 was record low production.
Yeah. And, again, with a record yield, it might encourage a little bit more sunflower acres to be planted in 26. I've noticed that we already have started to see a little bit of a pullback in prices as prices dropped yesterday after this report came out, showing quite a bit higher production than anticipated.
And then after all that, USDA also made supply and demand changes.
And those were surprising. When you look at the numbers that came out, for corn, for example, everybody was expecting, like we mentioned, yield to be dropped, production to be a little bit lower, and then we figured we'd see a cut as far as feed demand was concerned because of less animals. We've been feeding a little less consumption. That wasn't the case because of the large crop and the crop actually increasing a little bit. They increased feed demand by 100 million bushels. So right now, the industry is kind of questioning where that feed demand number is really coming from. And the fact that we have big stocks means lower prices, which means more feeding. And that's kind of the scenario or the mindset that they're using. But there is a big industry push that we're overestimating feed demand. Now, whether or not that's going to get changed moving forward, we still have a pretty good, comfortable ending stocks estimate in corn right now. And it's likely it's going to prevent corn from rallying a lot as we at least move through the spring.
Do you think they should have taken some of that feed increase and put it to exports instead?
They probably should have. Exports continue to be very strong. And as prices drop, we're going to see a little bit more demand come on the corn side. We're seeing a lot more countries coming in and interested in buying corn from the U.S. As South Korea has been active, especially this week they bought some. We're also seeing Colombia. Mexico again is by far the largest buyer, and there's even hints of China buying a little bit of corn. So right now, I think that the exports probably are being a little bit understated. Ethanol didn't change much. I don't expect that to change. We're pretty much on pace to make USDA's projections. But the feed demand is the one that's causing the biggest concern right now.
And then looking at soybeans, they did increase crush a bit, but they cut exports another 60 million bushels.
Which was a surprise in this. I thought they'd maybe wait to see just how China's performance has been. I mean, they pretty much have bought what they said they were going to buy in that 12 million metric ton. Now we'll spill over and see if they start buying into the 25 million metric ton that they talked about. But it does look like that on the big scale, China's going to go back to their 3-year average of purchasing. Now we're going to have to depend on other countries to kind of carry the weight of what China's going to kind of back away from. And so far, they've been doing it. We have been selling soybeans to a lot of areas. Crush continues to increase. So we are seeing the demand continue to expand for soybeans, which probably makes soybeans a little bit more of a market to maybe hang your hat on for 2026.
And then wheat, not a lot of changes. They did cut feed use 20 million bushels.
And exports have been going pretty good. It's just that, wheat has been a market that's been struggling to find its way because of large production everywhere in the world. And even though we've got good exports, our stock's sitting close to 926 million bushels. It's going to be tough for wheat to see a lot of push, just like in corn.
This was a little strange too. National average price. Soybeans dropped 30 cents. Corn went up 10 cents after we added all those bushels.
That has a lot of people scratching their heads of when you see almost 500 million bushels being added to your stocks, that you see price go up. And that tells us that they expect demand to continue to be pretty strong. And right now, it's kind of hard to argue with that. But that is one of them that has raised a lot of eyebrows as far as the report is concerned.
We also have the December 1 quarterly grain stocks numbers here. And again, not great numbers. We got a bit higher from last year, especially on the corn side.
Corn, and again, that was the one that was the biggest surprise, seeing over a billion more bushels than anticipated from last year. And when you increase the yield, you kind of expect that you got to see the stocks increase. Again, so wheat and soybeans, manageable numbers when you look at it. I mean, they really weren't terrible. They were negative. They weren't bearish, but the corn number coming in to be bearish. And then when you look at who's holding those stocks, with wheat, right now, 73% of the wheat is being held off farm. So that's basically in the elevators or the commercials' hands. For corn, basically 66% of it is held on farm. So that's the farmers that are holding that. For soybeans, we're looking at it almost being 50-50 between on farm and off farm. So it's interesting dynamic that farmers are holding the corn, elevators are holding the wheat, and soybeans both are holding.
And again, this just shows stocks by marketing year over the last several years. Anything stick out there on the wheat?
We're seeing an up, as far as the December stocks report is concerned, we're seeing it kind of maneuver upward. Stocks are starting to see a little bit of an increase for this time frame, which means that, either production's increased or demand has slowed down, but we're seeing more in the bin than what we are anticipating.
Corn, again, like we talked about, quite a bit higher than last year.
And again, and that was basically just on a production standpoint. So it will be interesting to see how the March stocks report looks, if we see a little bit more of if the demand continues to pull down supply.
And then soybeans, that's more stable there. We can see a lot of change there.
And again, crush has been helping quite a bit there to kind of keep that stable. Exports have been a little bit lackluster, but where the exports have given up, the crush has picked up.
Okay, we are still not done. We also had the winter wheat seedings report out yesterday. And again, this one, numbers came in higher than expected.
A lot higher than expected. I mean, the average trade guess had acres dropping 2 to 3%. I was more in the game of thinking it would be 5 to 7% lower acres. It actually came in unchanged. So it does show that maybe the producers down especially when you look at it in the Southern Plains, they had no risk by planting the winter wheat. Planted, if the crop makes it, they'll keep it. If it doesn't or prices don't change, they'll graze it out for calves in the spring and then plant a different crop. So right now, I think what's really going to be interesting is how many of these acres stay to go all the way to harvest, or how many get abandoned here in the spring.
And again, looking at those numbers, are you surprised that Oklahoma went up 16% from last year?
Almost 250,000 more acres planted in Oklahoma. So that was a huge increase. We saw about 100,000 acre decrease in Kansas and Colorado. Texas and Oklahoma, the two big ones that saw an increase. But yes, I was surprised to see that we saw that big of an acre increase in Oklahoma. Not so much for Texas. I mean, that improved by about 100,000, which isn't too bad. But for the most part, surprised that Kansas didn't see a bigger drop.
And again, looking at the acres there, we kind of have stabilized on the planted side.
And again, the big part here is going to be how much is going to be kept and how much is, where harvested acres are going to fall. And traditionally, and last year we saw that harvested acres dropped a little bit more than average. We'll see if that falls into play this year. Calf prices are good. So a lot of these acres could be just grazed out by calves, which would put a lot of weight on the calves and help. It basically would be make more money by putting the calves on them than keeping the wheat. So that might be the scenario that plays out for winter wheat this spring.
We are seeing drought conditions, I think, in like 40-some% of the winter wheat area. I think crop conditions dropped significantly in some of the states last month in the condition ratings.
Yep, that's a good point. I mean, we did see some huge drops, especially Oklahoma, I think, dropped like 26%. Nebraska was down 16%. Kansas dropped by a couple percent. So, yeah, the month of December was a tough month as far as the winter wheat crop was concerned. We'll see going forward if that continues. And that would also then lead to the possibility of this crop being grazed out by calves if the conditions continue to decline.
And this shows winter wheat planted acres versus last year. With all that red there, it's hard to believe we actually saw more of or less of a decrease than we thought.
The big one was the fact that Oklahoma planted a lot of acres. And what's interesting is that, even we saw more in the soft red area, which is, the eastern Corn Belt side of things. I was surprised to see winter wheat acres get planted there for as rough as their fall was, that they were able to get that planted.
And then the last thing we're going to talk about is some world numbers. South American production, USDA did not change anything except increasing Brazil 3 million metric tons, which was needed. I think some of the private estimates are up to 180 now.
Right now, yeah, the Brazil soybean crop looks pretty good. I mean, they've had some pretty good weather. Things have been moving along pretty decent. So that was not a surprise to see that for Brazil, to see the soybean production increase. Surprised that we didn't see any kind of a decrease in Argentina, as they've been seeing dry conditions, but they're still in the planting phase. So we probably won't see that here for another month or so.
And then looking at world numbers, the major countries, we also saw Argentina wheat increase 3.5 million, and Russia wheat, they made another 2 million metric ton increase to their production.
And Russia's, getting ever close to that 90 million metric ton again, so that's interesting to see that Russia saw a little bit of an increase. Argentina, they're harvesting right now. Their yields have been coming in good. So that wasn't a big surprise as far as the trade was concerned. They were expecting to see Argentina crop increased.
And then to wrap it up, we have world ending stocks at corn from last month. We're up another 11.7 million metric tons worldwide.
That really hit the corn market pretty hard when seeing that. And a lot of that, and some of that, it wasn't just the U.S. numbers that saw the increase, but we also saw China increase their corn production by 6 million metric ton. That's a big part of this. And a lot of that is going right to their ending stocks estimate. So right now, China looks, they're trying to switch over and produce a lot more corn to become a little more self-sufficient.
Soybeans, again, 2 million, wheat 3.4. Those were not nearly as dramatic there.
No, that soybean number is actually, again, manageable when you look at everything and how it's playing out. Even with the increase that we saw in Brazil, it's still a manageable number. Wheat is starting to get up there, but again, lot of big increase in production numbers out of a majority of the major exporting countries.
And that wraps it up. So now with this out of the way, what do we look at going forward?
Boy, that's a good question. I mean, right now, a lot of the focus is going to be on, I think right now they'll look at three things. One of them, it's going to be shipments of soybeans to China. That's going to be important as long as we can keep getting the shipments moving and not see any cancellations of sales. Second part, I think, they're going to be paying close attention to South America weather, especially the Argentina, where it's a little bit on the dry side. Long-term forecasts have been calling for dry conditions for Brazil, but it just hasn't set up yet. They're pretty much sitting pretty good. And they are harvesting in the north. So harvest has started. And so now yield reports will also start to become part of the play. And then the other part will be watching corn demand, if exports can continue to expand or if the demand can continue to stay strong for corn. That'll be the big things I think that the market watches going forward.
Okay. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, our contact information is here. Reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.